Cold air ran between my legs as they pushed me to my home. The street was filled as always. I was shoving my way past it. Yells of being called a brat or a fuck being spouted from time to time at me. But it didn't matter or stick much, as what actually did. Tears still fresh on my face as I ran. So this is what living is, or what it means. Despair, hatred, sadness, survival. What meaning there was, it was so easy to break, so easy to lose. Something we don't think can be lost, yet it does. Eventually I made it back to the hole where my items were. It was so cold that day. Ghastly puffs coming from my mouth with each pant. My face was numb from the cold, the moistures of my tears adding onto it. The day was still high. People just trying to live with their meanings passing by. But there I was, slumped over and yelling in emotional agony. And they all just passed without a care. Well, as everyone did. As I did. So it was to be in this bubble that no one cared for. Time went past terribly until my brother arrived with blood and bruises covering him. Barely standing straight, he would collapse near me in our hovel built into the broken wall. As I did for hours before, he would soon join me with me, engulfed in tears, wailing our harmony of pain within our silent bubble as the world walked by without a care. Midday had turned to late evening. We had tired ourselves out, although we wanted to continue for as long as time stood within the moments. We had to, Tarvis. My brother spoke to me in his ached voice, breaking the silence. I stared at him. He showed with the drying tears in his eyes while I began to recoil back with spite and anguish. No, we didn't. We didn't. I didn't want to, but you two did. How this fucking happened. My brother Sten merely looked ashamed as he began to tear up again. Although, it stopped much quicker this time. Whether from sheer exhaustion or from the adrenaline finally leaving his system, for him to feel his body properly. I will not ever know, but he sat up slumped and looked somberly at the crowds, which began to die down as evening turned to twilight. My body ached as well, but not from the same reasons as him. My eyes eventually compelled me to pass out against my will. I tried to fight them. I wanted to say more to my brother, but it was for the best. I had lost enough today already. Losing more of my own strength wasn't needed. The blurs of the warm streetlights and the cooling air mixing with my drunken tiredness soon overwhelmed me. As all went to black, I wondered if this was how it felt for him when we left him. As time went on, Sten rarely spoke anymore. We moved further away from our comfy nook, moved further into the depths of the slums we called home. The winter had arrived and it was warmer in the center areas. I spent my days eyeing those around me more, and the girl guarded her from the corner, her green eyes catching my fancy more each day. Yet Sten said to be careful when he did speak. Careful of what? I never knew. He would only utter it to the point which it had no meaning left, as most things do. Since then, each day, each step I took since their body lay cold on the concrete through our fumbles and decisions, each felt empty and lull. Days passed in mere minutes. Sleep felt longer than it should have. I didn't like the void I saw when my body forced itself into rest mode. It was enough to be cold awake, but the cold of being asleep now could be felt more in my bones than anything else. Sten wasted away, as I did too. I had to keep us both alive as Sten did with me before all of this, like when we were younger, as he once did when he was around. Now we lacked our freedoms even more and worked in the mills to live, as we were never as good as he was. The upper levels were better, but each day still felt numbing and burning at the end. But the time passed in such a short interval for me, it didn't matter. As for Sten, I can only hope his perception of time was the same as mine. Another incursion occurred recently. For food, most likely again. The rioting grew bad, leaving us having to move again. But we lost the last of our things we called our own. Even if it was all scrap and junk. The only things that survived were the gun, the steel box, and a cell, and the shit we had on us. Sten was more or less a mute now, and it had been years since he took the eternal silence, speaking in grunts and hums with me, as well as conveying with the stares in his dulling eyes. I still remember his last words he told me, as Garter and I went to shop for scraps together that day. Be careful. Our bodies grew stronger in the sense from the labor of the mills, but weaker in the grander scheme. Garter had left her family to be with me. She took fancy to me as well. Yet, the days grew longer around her by only a few minutes. An addition I never liked, although I liked her. It made the day and its meaningless tasks feel more sluggish. It carried the dreaded effect of sleep approaching faster now by some means. My body craved it more and more as I had avoided it. I resisted fully to avoid going back to the cold void. My left arm marked as I forced myself away by pricking myself with a needle. But I would always cave in eventually. It always came to my fucking hatred when I awoke. I was near my mid-20s. As old and as grown as both me and Sten were, in my blood, I still felt my youth in a sickly way. It remained. Why, I do not know. I could tell Sten felt it as well. His silence may have been this feeling. Even with age, we weren't like him as he wanted us to. We stayed more or less the same mentally. Years later. Tarv, would you get some more wood, please? I need to prepare for lunch. My dear Garter spoke to me from across the table. Sure. I lifted myself from the chair. How is Sten doing? I asked as I hadn't seen him most of the day. Garter panned over to the window with the same stare I've come to know. Outside, like always, he went hunting. I'll bring him back for lunch, I replied back to my beloved wife. I grabbed the axe and hand wagon as I left the door. The cold air of the dawning night brushing through my curls of my scalp. The walk being short, I gathered the firewood and went to search for Sten. I am approaching my late 20s now. Time had slowed down and the cold of sleep had not felt as dreadful. Yet it remained forever piercing, but softened as we became outlings. We built a house and expanded it ever since we left the slums when the Wex arrived to keep control. The life suited us well. I knew not why we remarked for our decision to leave, but it gave us more attention than when we sat in the alley hall those years ago wailing. But no one would come or care enough at the time. We traded the old gun that led to this fate for a rifle to hunt, sold meat, and grew into our home, hidden in the woods. Things felt more simple, more real now. Even more so when reality I hit all those years ago. I knew now of this feeling, but the empty of my days hurt less now. Eventually, I found Sten by a small river, sitting on a stump. It was where he always went. I told him things were almost ready for lunch, and I had gathered the firewood for the house. He merely stared out into the emerging stars before gazing at me. I sat on a rock next to him, realizing what he wanted. The air stood incredibly quiet, and I swore I could feel the hums of the flowing river nearby. I looked at him, and muttered silently in the way I always used to return to him. You No, after this long, I still can't believe we're here. Yeah, there's still no meaning to it all. He stared forever into the starry void. Stan, I've told you too many times. He's gone. And there's nothing. Nothing means shit anymore. You have been careful like you always used to say to death to the point it meant nothing anymore. And now here we are. We're almost 30. We lost our lives like everyone else, but in a shittier way. I stood up and sighing with a large white puff exiting my mouth. Come on, Sten. There is no meaning to this or life. There was from what it seemed. Now, come on. Garter's cooking. I picked up the axe and moved it to the wagon. As I began my first step, my body stood shocked, froze along with my ears. It couldn't have been, but it was. Stets had spoken, for the first time in over a decade and a half. I stopped and rushed at him. He spoke somberly again. There is meaning, Tarf. Meaning you were careful at finally finding after I had beaten it into you. You let go enough to search on your own. His words simply flew over me as I was excited. Sten, you spoke. God, you're back. Oh God, you're back. Yelling as I embraced him. But he remained cold. My stare of joy turning dull quickly. Sten? Tarvis. What? What is it? My speaking doesn't matter. What does matter is the meaning you have now. I looked perplexed at him, with a twitch in my eye. Sten, come on. This isn't the time for that stuff now. Things are just the same, but in the woods now, as you know. I hastily replied back to Sten, who had sounded the same when he last spoke. He stood up and glared at me into my eyes with his. You say that, and they're not. Why? For years, you and I had lost ourselves, saying there was no meaning left. And for a while, it was true. I felt numb, and the heat on the back of my neck. His eyes were filled with sentences as he spoke to me. It felt like a conversation with him and his clone in one body, telling me to shush and open my heart to listen for once. As you have read my eyes for years, I can read yours. You know what I have to say is true, yet you deny it. Why? I felt chilled after the warmth. It became a cycle as I returned to him. Denying what? Things have never been the same, or felt good ever? My face grew warm enough to keep us both warm for tonight. Sten continued reading through me, and my soul like a magician. Tarvis, I know you felt like things haven't changed, especially within us both. Thinking we never did grow like you wanted us to, but we did. For a time, we really didn't, yes. But in my escape, I only pondered and thought of why. He continued as I remained frozen. Tarv, we grew. We have meaning now in our lives. You have to accept it. I've seen you. I mean, how could I have not? You have a wife that you love. A wife you will protect till your dying breath. And you have looked after me, non-stop. A proper home. Riches. All of this. As I pondered, he embraced me back before letting go. The swelling of years rushed back to me to the point where I couldn't even stand anymore. I lay broken on the permafrost, yet I felt home. You see, we found it. We found our place, Tarv. We found it like he said we would. We have our fortune. We are rich now. He spoke somberly as I steadied myself. You see, we found it. We found our place, Tarv. We found it like he said we would. We have our fortune. We are rich now. He spoke somberly as I stood myself up. I had realized what he had meant, and came to the terms of his words at last. I always thought the meaning was gone. That life was gone, Sten. It's never gone. It just gets lost until we find it again. Things are just this way and always will be with everyone. It's just we got hit hard with it. Now that we've recovered, we are better than we once were. But what gives it meaning? What gives me the right to breathe the same value like the fen we stole? Questions surged in my mind. Most were variations of the same question, most were stupid or made no sense. He only smiled back at me. Garter did. Our home did. You did. It was always you. When you felt it years back when we first came here, I knew that I had found it too. Only now that it has finally matured, now I can say it to you too. I looked back at my feet with wonder, not knowing what else to do. Before long, Sten came forward again, and I saw it in his stare. It told me everything I needed to. With a smile, I stared back. Let's go home now. Garter's probably mad, but she will be surprised by this. He chuckled. It felt as valued as Silentium to me after all of this time. Yeah, and I'm also hungry for a stew. It was always my favorite. Plus I need to tell her that now. He paused and looked back in the direction of our home. And hey, may have lost our younger years, Tarvis, but we still got our prime in front of us now. Especially with these new eyes of ours. He grabbed the rifle and the kill he had nearby, and we hauled it back home, proudly in the silence of the night. Having a wonderful, now, dinner that night with Klee in the air I thought I've lost. All this time the bubble had finally popped, and I didn't even know it until now. As I stared at the table before me, lined with the treasures I valued so.